Hi everyone. Today I'm having a look at the limited edition Seimitsu LSH-56-01 joystick. This specific variant has a clear shaft cover and comes with a specially designed irregular spring. Only 2,000 units were manufactured and sold worldwide. The joystick uses the new Seimitsu 5-pin circuit board with Omron switches, and it ships with an octagonal restrictor. When I bought this joystick, I was planning to install it immediately, but when it arrived, the pivot had way too much grease on it. There was so much grease applied at the factory that the lubricant oozed out and it ran under the shaft cover. I couldn't just install this mess into my arcade controller. I needed to remove the excess grease from the pivot and clean the shaft and the inside of the shaft cover. But the shaft cover on the Seimitsu joystick doesn't just slip off. If I had to do a similar thing with a Sanwa JLF joystick, I would simply take off the shaft cover, and then I could clean up the excess lubricant. Because the shaft cover on the Seimitsu joystick is sandwiched between the shaft and the pivot, I will have to partially disassemble the joystick to release the shaft cover so I can clean it. The silicone-based lubricant is not very greasy. Its consistency is similar to a light hand moisturizing cream, and it can be easily wiped off using paper towels and cotton tip swabs. I will be using a small flathead screwdriver to pop off the E-clip. For smaller E-clips, I sometimes use a pick. And to replace the E-clip, I will use small needle nose pliers. To remove the E-clip, I always start with the 5-pin connector facing away, and with the E-clip opening turned toward my thumb. Then, with firm pressure on the actuator to compress the spring, I carefully pry the E-clip off. Just before the E-clip pops off, I place one of my fingers behind it to prevent it from flying away. With the E-clip removed, I can now slowly release the spring tension and take out the actuator. The spring in this limited edition joystick is irregular. One side is loose, while the other side is tightly coiled. In its default orientation, the spring returns the shaft to center quicker. But if the tight coils are facing the bottom of the joystick, the spring action is lighter, which enables quicker inputs. Compared to the standard Seimitsu LS56 spring, the limited edition spring is much longer and has more coils overall. And when compared to the standard Sanwa JLF spring, the limited edition spring is longer with a significantly smaller radius. With the E-clip, the actuator, and the spring removed, I can now slide out the shaft and the shaft cover. The red spring base can remain inside the joystick assembly. And because there's so much grease, the pivot remains stuck to the joystick body. Before I take out the pivot, I will remove the bulk of the grease using cotton tip swabs. I am saving some of the silicone grease for later. With most of the excess lubricant removed, I can now take out the pivot without making a big mess. There was definitely too much grease applied at the factory. I will remove the rest of the lubricant from the pivot using a paper towel. Next, I will clean up some of the grease from the shaft. And then I will remove the shaft cover and wipe off the rest. To clean the shaft cover on the inside, I will use a rolled paper towel. And finally, I will remove the last bit of the silicone grease from the joystick body using a few extra cotton tip swabs. The grease only needs to be on surfaces that make direct contact with the pivot. The rest should be removed. To put the joystick back together, I will start by reapplying some of the silicone grease I saved earlier. We only need a tiny bit on the pivot surface which contacts the joystick body. Any big globs should be spread around evenly. With the pivot back in its place, it's good to slide it around to ensure the grease is distributed and that any excess is wiped off. Unlike the Sanwa JLF, the Seimitsu joystick shaft and the shaft cover can only fit together one way. It's impossible to reassemble the joystick unless the shaft cover is put on correctly. Of the 4 possible options, only one of them is correct. The shaft cover needs to be put on from the bottom of the shaft with the partially closed end of the cover facing down. Because the Seimitsu shaft cover cannot be taken off without partially disassembling the joystick, it's good to check if there's any visible grease on the shaft before putting it back together. With the shaft cover seated properly, I will slowly put the bottom of the shaft through the pivot to ensure it is aligned with the spring base on the underside of the joystick assembly. Then I can replace the spring and the actuator. When working with so much grease, it's good to check and wipe clean all components that shouldn't be lubricated. To put the E-clip back on, I will gently guide the actuator past the microswitches and push it down with my thumb to reveal the groove on the joystick shaft. Then I will put the E-clip into the groove and slowly release the actuator so it holds the E-clip in place. In this position, the E-clip can still fall out and the actuator and a compressed spring could be ejected. I always keep my thumb gently resting on the actuator while pressing the E-clip onto the shaft with my needle nose pliers. This allows me to catch the actuator should the E-clip fall out. To ensure it's firmly seated, give the E-clip a wiggle to check it's not going to fall out. Then test the joystick to confirm it's moving smoothly in all directions. And that's it. The Seimitsu LSH-56-01 Limited Edition joystick is back together without the excess grease. I hope you found this video interesting. Thanks for watching.